Hello to you, Mr. Sturgeon. Thanks for joining us. What did you think when you heard the Prime Minister last night?
Well, look, let me make a point, and I would counter, I guess, and challenge the idea of division. This is not a political statement, it's a statement of law. The lockdown restrictions are in place separately in each of the 4 nations of the UK, so we've all got a legal responsibility to assess them and make judgments about what can be eased and what can. And the virus may be spreading at slightly different rates in different parts of the UK, so it is entirely possible for us to come to different decisions for perfectly justifiable reasons. The Prime Minister last night, apart from things like border control, was talking about lifting restrictions in England. I have to make judgments about what's right for Scotland. I, at this stage, think it would be too risky to ease restrictions because the virus, while we've made progress against it, is not sufficiently under control yet. That progress we've made is fragile, and I think it's really important to err on the side of caution and be very careful. So we announced one change in Scotland yesterday, which is you can now exercise outside as often as you like, as long as you stay.
1 second, Ms. Sturgeon, if you would, please. Good morning, Health Secretary. How are you? Good morning. Very well. When will we hear more from the Prime Minister?
More from the Prime Minister later, yeah.
This afternoon?
In Parliament.
Thank you. So more from the Prime Minister in Parliament later this afternoon. Sorry about that, Ms. Sturgeon. The Health Secretary just arriving, telling us we will hear more from the Prime Minister later on. I'm sure that you will be very keen to hear what he has to say.
Actually, I was keener to continue to give a message to Scotland, which is, apart from essential purposes, to stay at home. That's the public health advice in Scotland at this stage. The essential purposes are essential work, going out for food or medicine, and going out for exercise, as long as you stay away from people in other households. And I think there's a duty on all of us as leaders to be very clear about the advice we're giving. That is a duty that I bear in Scotland, and it's a duty the Prime Minister bears in England. And I think he has to be careful to make it clear that when he's talking about lockdown restrictions, he is talking about England, not about Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Of course, it's really important that we continue to coordinate as much as possible, but it is entirely possible and perhaps necessary for us to be on slightly different timelines. We're seeing similar things in other countries, in Germany and Italy, for example, where there is differences in different parts of the country depending on the state of the virus at the time.
There are many Scots who are listening to you this morning, though, who are very keen to get back to work, not least because their money's running out.
We're very keen to get people back to work, but we are absolutely not going to encourage people to go back to work before there is confidence about the safety of workplaces and confidence that we are not putting people at risk of getting the virus and becoming seriously unwell. So I am as anxious as anybody to get the economy restarted. We are discussing with different sectors here in Scotland the guidance that will be required in order to return safely. We want that to be as quickly as possible. But I keep saying, because I think it is right, that we at this stage must err on the side of caution. The worst thing we could do for everybody, and for businesses included, would be to move too quickly now, see the virus run out of control again, and then in a couple of weeks find ourselves having to have more strict restrictions rather than being in a position of easing them. So I make no apology right now as First Minister with a heavy responsibility to try to protect the population of Scotland as much as I can. I make no apology for being careful and cautious as we try to bring the country out of this lockdown situation.
Sure, and I certainly wouldn't want that burden on my shoulders, First Secretary, but First Minister, forgive me. But what about countries like, I don't know, Sweden and Singapore, who've managed to keep their schools open throughout, and yet the United Kingdom and many other countries have decided not to? I'm sure that you've turned your face that way, and you've wondered why they've managed to do that. What have you gathered from that?
The example is not without controversy, and all countries have to reach their own judgments. We're looking very closely at examples from other countries now, particularly as countries that are a bit ahead of us in the infection curve start to ease restrictions. The paper the Scottish Government published last week had some evidence in it that came from Denmark's experience of opening schools again. So we look at all of this international experience, but fundamentally we have to be driven by the data in our own countries and apply our best judgment to that data. None of these decisions are easy, they're all complex. I'm not sure there are any absolute rights and wrongs when you're dealing with a situation as unprecedented as this, but all of us are trying to do the best we can and making these difficult judgments and coming to these very complex balances. I'm sure that's true of Boris Johnson. I certainly know it's true of the Scottish Government here in Scotland, and we must make these judgments on a clear basis of decision-making, prioritising public health, but also, you're right to say, being very aware of all of the other harms that the way in which we are tackling the virus through lockdown are doing, and trying to balance and mitigate all of that as much as possible.
The tourism industry is going to take quite a beating, isn't it? It's important to the whole of the UK. It's very important to people in Scotland. We're hearing from Dominic Raab, who is giving us a bit more flesh on the bone today, saying that potentially pubs and restaurants could open as early as the 4th of July in England. He would like that to be in the whole of the United Kingdom. Do you think that's possible?
The honest answer, Kay, right now is I don't know whether that date will be possible. Let me say that the tourism industry is hugely important in Scotland to our economy, but also to our reputation and brand as a country. Hugely valuable, that sector, in all of its diversity and variety. So I want to get pubs and restaurants, the tourism sector more generally, up and running as quickly as possible. But I will not do any favours to any of these businesses if we ease restrictions prematurely and allow the virus to run out of control again, because then we'll find ourselves in lockdown for longer. So we need to balance all of that carefully and be guided by the best possible data. And these are the decisions we will take step by step over the next few weeks. I don't want these restrictions to be in place for a single minute longer than they have to be, but they must be in place for as long as is necessary to get this virus under control, so that we can then start to ease restrictions, but keep it under control through a mix of continued social distancing to some extent. That's going to be with us for some time, and also tactics like test, trace and isolate. So it's really important that we do these things as quickly as possible, but not too quickly, and that we do them carefully every step of the way.
And the 14 days quarantining at the airports, how's that going to work for you and your fellow Scots?
Well, you know, the issues around border control are for the UK government to take. I support that. I do think as we suppress this virus and start to open up again, we have to be careful about not bringing it in from other places. Again, these are things none of us want to have to be in place. That will have a big ongoing implication for our tourism sector. But it's really important that we, through different means, continue to suppress the virus. Until we get a vaccine or a treatment, or find that there is immunity and we've got antibody testing that can tell us that, we will have to learn to live with this virus, and that will involve us doing all sorts of things that we would never just a few months ago have contemplated. But we've seen in the last few weeks the toll this virus can take in the loss of life, and particularly its impact on older people. So suppressing it has to be a priority. The challenge for all of us now is to find the ways of doing that while still bringing a semblance of normality back to our everyday lives. And that's got to be done carefully, but absolutely nobody is more anxious than I am in Scotland to get that normality back into our everyday lives as quickly as possible.
What's been the most challenging part of lockdown for you?
Well, as a person, as a citizen like everybody else, it's not been able to see my family, my own parents, my sister, my niece and nephews, my mother-in-law who's 90 and you know, vulnerable. That's really difficult for all of us. As First Minister, the weight of responsibility of trying to get these decisions as right as possible, knowing that there's no certainties in this and mistakes inevitably will be made along the way. But, you know, bearing that responsibility as everybody in a position of leadership is doing right now, of knowing how important these decisions are, because, you know, it's not been dramatic or exaggerating to say that they are a matter of life and death. And that is a heavy responsibility that I'm very aware of every single day.
It's good to talk to you. Keep well. Thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.